They thought he was lost, just another tired body in a slow coat, clutching a folded envelope and wearing a hat too old to matter. Veteran or not, he's just loitering. The security guard muttered as he waved a hand toward the waiting room. Because in buildings like this, if you don't arrive in a black SUV or with a smartphone badge, you're invisible. Harold Mendez, 83 years old, sat down without complaint, his legs aching from the walk and his left hand curled loosely around the worn cap in his lap, the one that read, "Purple Heart Recipient," in faded thread. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence made people uncomfortable, and the silence grew louder when he opened the envelope no one had yet noticed. Inside were two items, a Department of Defense seal stamped in wax, and a letter from a general whose name rang loud in DC circles. But no one read it. Not yet. That moment was still minutes away. Right now, Harold was just a silhouette near the lobby wall, quietly watching people pass, overhearing the snickers that came after the security guard snapped a blurry photo of him and muttered, "Another hat and a tail grandpa trying to get a handshake." If you agree that respect should never be earned through noise, but through sacrifice, make sure to like and subscribe, because this story deserves to be remembered. The receptionist didn't look up when he cleared his throat. The guard didn't offer a smile. Not even a chair was offered, just a waiting room and the laughter of two interns who couldn't stop giggling after one said, "Bet he tells people he trained Chuck Norris." But Harold remained unmoved, studying the floor tiles like they were coordinates. Because he wasn't just visiting. He had come with purpose, summoned by a name the CEO of this very building used to whisper in night terrors, a name from a battlefield 40 years gone, when Harold Mendez carried that man through enemy fire with a gut wound and no backup. Back then, titles didn't matter. Rank didn't matter. Only blood, resolve, and whether you were willing to die to get someone else home. And Harold had been willing. But today, the world saw only his slowness, not his story. His cap, not his courage. Until the call came in. 5 minutes after the laughter started, the landline on the security desk rang, the line. The red one, with a number no intern knew and no one ever used. Trevor, the guard, still chewing on sunflower seeds, answered casually. "Reception," he said, but his tone shifted in seconds. "Yes, sir. He's here right now." He glanced up at Harold with new eyes, the kind that start to realize they've made a mistake too big to fix. 2 SUVs pulled up outside within minutes. Men in dark suits stepped out, followed by a decorated officer whose very shoes silenced the sidewalk. They didn't stop at the front desk. They didn't ask for an escort. They walked straight to Harold, still seated, still calm. The officer saluted first. "Sir," he said, voice firm but full of emotion. "We're late." And Harold, finally, allowed himself a smile. Not for attention, not for glory, but because someone remembered. Because after all these years, someone had kept their word. And Trevor? Trevor didn't speak. He couldn't. Because the man he mocked had just been escorted through the lobby like a visiting dignitary. And the letter Harold carried? It wasn't a plea. It was a thank you from the Secretary of Defense himself, addressed to Harold Mendez, with an offer to install his name in the Hall of Valor. But none of that was visible to the interns who laughed, or the receptionist who ignored him, or the guard who scoffed. All they saw was an old man in a purple hat. Until the Pentagon called. He was still sitting there when the coffee machine sputtered out its last cup, when the third intern of the day passed by and whispered "dinosaur" under her breath, thinking he couldn't hear, and maybe, in a way, he couldn't. Not with his ears, at least. Harold Mendez heard through patterns, through the rhythm of boots he no longer wore and the sting of a field dressing applied with trembling hands in a jungle far from polished floors and climate control. He waited without checking the time, not because he wasn't aware of it, but because men like Harold didn't watch clocks. They learned long ago that real things don't arrive on schedule. The receptionist looked up once, maybe twice, but didn't speak. Her glance didn't linger. There was no reason to. He didn't match the profile of someone important. The older gentleman with the military cap and the two calm eyes simply blended into the background, as if he were a statue that had wandered in and sat down. What no one noticed, not even Trevor, the security guard now lost in his phone, was the slight tremble in Harold's hands, not from fear, but from the decades-old shrapnel lodged near his shoulder. And inside that envelope he clutched like a second heartbeat? Not a complaint. Not a resume. A letter, personally signed by Major General Roland M. Vickers, sealed with the Department of Defense's insignia in raised brass. It read, "Mr. Mendez, your request to personally hand-deliver your commendation to Mr. Kenneth York is not only approved, it is encouraged. Some debts deserve eye contact." That envelope was his mission. But like all missions, it began with waiting, with silence, with being overlooked. Trevor, in his tactical boots and flexing posture, had already bragged twice to his coworker Jamie that he'd shut down some old faker. "Purple Heart, my ass," he muttered. That probably saw a medal in a flea market and thought it gave him VIP access. Jamie laughed. "Watch, he's going to ask for a military discount on our vending machines." But Harold didn't ask for anything. He just waited. The only person in the entire glass-walled lobby who even paused was a young delivery guy dropping off catering trays. He saw the cap, nodded with a slight, "Thanks, sir," then moved on. He didn't know the whole story, but something about the man's posture, the way his back remained straight even though everything else looked like it hurt, told him this wasn't someone who made things up. Meanwhile, the laughter kept circling like a lazy hawk, not sharp, not cruel, just casual, a slow erosion of dignity by a generation trained to smirk before they salute. Trevor, emboldened by his own ignorance, took another blurry photo and tagged it in a private chat with the caption, "Guess who's back to storm Normandy?" right after his afternoon nap. They left, but outside, the clouds had begun to gather. Because somewhere on the 5th floor, an executive assistant named Melissa, who once served 2 years as a combat nurse, saw the security feed and froze. Her heart skipped when she saw the name stitched into the envelope in Harold's lap. "Mendez," she whispered. "Harold Mendez." She didn't call the CEO. She didn't call security. She called a number she hadn't dialed in 10 years, a number that belonged to the Pentagon's liaison office for battlefield recognitions. "You have a visitor in the waiting room," she said. "I believe you'll want to confirm his identity." Quietly. Less than 3 minutes later, a phone rang, not her desk phone, not the general line, the security desk phone, the one they kept in case of emergency protocols. Trevor picked it up with a roll of his eyes. "Yeah." And then his face went slack. "Why, yes, sir." "No. I didn't realize." "He's here, still here. He hasn't left." A pause. "Yes, sir. I understand." He set the phone down like it was made of glass. His coworker looked up. "Who was that?" Trevor didn't answer. But suddenly he was very, very still. A low beep echoed from the lobby's private side entrance. 2 black SUVs, government plates, pulled to a stop with military precision. The building manager came running, confused. "Are we expecting him?" But no one answered him either. For uniformed men stepped out 2 officers, 1 aide, and at the front, a tall, sharp-jawed figure in dress blues whose uniform bore ribbons that no civilian could pronounce but every soldier would salute. The lobby turned quiet in an instant. Trevor instinctively stood straighter. He tried to adjust his belt, as if ironing out wrinkles could erase disrespect. But the men didn't speak to him. They walked past. Walked straight toward the old man in the chair, who hadn't moved an inch. The officer saluted, crisp and silent. "Mr. Mendez," he said. "We're here to escort you." For the first time since arriving, Harold stood. Slowly, with effort, but without assistance. "Appreciate the punctuality, son," he said calmly. The uniformed aide gently took the envelope from Harold's hand and cradled it like a contained glass. Trevor tried to speak. "Sir, I didn't know he was," but the officer turned once. Just once. And the look he gave said everything. "You didn't care to know." As Harold Mendez walked toward the elevators, the same interns who had laughed now stood silent, unsure if they should apologize or disappear. The receptionist finally closed her laptop. Jamie backed up near the desk. The letter, it turned out, wasn't just ceremonial. It was authorization to induct Harold into the National Valor Archive. His name would be engraved into a permanent exhibit beneath the Pentagon rotunda. But what mattered more? The letter included a note, handwritten in the corner. "Mr. York owes you his life." He requested this be hand-delivered to remind him why. And that CEO, who had forgotten the name of the man who carried him through mortar fire in 1983, he would remember again, today, at 3 p.m., when Harold Mendez walked into his office and handed him that note face to face. But before that happened, the man who'd once been mocked for wearing an old hat was now being escorted like a head of state. And Trevor? Trevor would later be relieved of his post, not just for his comment, but for the photo, which leaked and went viral. "Guard mocks real hero," the caption read. But by then, Harold had already delivered his message. Already walked his quiet steps of honor. Already changed the entire building without raising his voice. all by sitting still, until the Pentagon called. The elevator ride was slow and silent. Harold never liked small talk before important things. Beside him, the officer stood still, cradling the envelope like it was the last thing keeping the past from slipping away, and in many ways, it was. Up on the 30th floor, where the glass shone too clean and the carpets absorbed sound like secrets, Kenneth York was pacing. The CEO, whose name graced embossed plaques, didn't look like the man Harold remembered screaming in a jungle clearing, holding his own intestines in with both hands while mortar rounds pounded the tree lean. But then again, Harold didn't look like the man who crawled 40 yards under gunfire to drag him out. Time has its own camouflage. At precisely 2:59 p.m., the elevator doors slid open. Harold stepped out first, his limbs slower now, but his back straight, so straight it made the young assistant standing nearby blink in surprise. She whispered something into her headset and opened the glass doors ahead. Kenneth York stood in his office, alone, hands clasped behind him, eyes distant. When he turned and saw Harold, everything else, his position, the skyline view, even the $1,000 suit, collapsed under the weight of memory. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His lips parted, then closed, then parted again. And then, slowly, shakily, he walked forward, not with the confidence of a titan of industry, but with the reverence of a man facing the one person he owed more than his career, more than his success, his life. Harold reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and removed the envelope, the wax seal glinting faintly in the sunlight slicing through the windows. "I was asked to deliver this," he said, his voice as steady as it had been when he last barked orders through a busted radio under enemy fire. Kenneth took it with both hands, like a man receiving a folded flag. He turned it over once, twice, and then set it gently on his desk without opening it. "They told me," Kenneth said, his voice barely above a breath. I didn't know it was you." Harold just nodded. "Most don't." A pause. "Most forget." Kenneth didn't deny it. Couldn't. Instead, he reached under his desk, opened a drawer, and removed a small object, a laminated field photo, bent at the corners, stained with age. It was them. Both of them. Younger, blood-covered, eyes too wide. Harold holding York up with one arm while gripping an M16 in the other. "I kept it," Kenneth whispered. "I've seen it 1,000 times." Harold looked at it, then at the man holding it, and something softened in his eyes. "Then you remembered better than most." Behind them, the uniformed officer cleared his throat gently. "There's one more item, Mr. Mendez," he said, stepping forward. From a black case, he produced a velvet-lined box. Inside, a new Purple Heart, a reissued, updated, preserved. "This is yours. Official revalidation, with command-level citation." Harold hesitated before taking it. He didn't wear the original. Never needed to. But now, he accepted it, not for himself, but for every man who had died in the missions that never made headlines. For those who didn't come back to glass offices or laughter. For the ones whose names were spoken only at dawn roll calls and marble walls. York stepped back, his eyes moist now. "I told them you saved me, you know," he said. "But I didn't do enough. I let them forget. I let myself forget." Harold shook his head. "You remembered. That's why I came in person." They stood in silence, two men who once faced death, now facing something far harder, gratitude spoken too late. "There's a ceremony next week," the officer said gently. "Arlington. All of valor. Your name's already etched." Harold nodded once. "Then I'll bring flowers." "For who?" the officer asked. "Everyone else," he replied. "I'm just passing through." They offered to escort him out, to drive him back, to open doors. He declined it all, walked to the elevator himself, hand lightly touching the sealed envelope still sitting unopened on York's desk, as if to say, "You already know what's inside. I came so you'd feel it." Down in the lobby, the silence was different now. Trevor stood near the security desk, not uniformed, just waiting, holding a folded sheet of paper that looked too crisp to be a resume and too honest to be a lie. "Mr. Mendez," he called out as Harold walked past. The older man paused but didn't turn. "I'm sorry," Trevor said. "I didn't know. I should have." Still Harold didn't face him, but his voice returned, quiet as winter went. "Knowing isn't hard," he said. "Caring is." Then he stepped out into the afternoon sun. He didn't look back at the building, didn't wave, didn't stop. He just walked, one foot steady, the other stiff from an old scar. And somewhere between the click of the doors and the hush of wind, the world shifted, just slightly. Back inside, Kenneth York finally opened the envelope. Inside, one line written in Harold's uneven hand. "You lived." So lead like it meant something. The next day, the building's front security desk was replaced. A new bronze plaque hung above it. In honor of Harold Mendez, Purple Heart Recipient Combat Medic Defender of the Silent. Beneath it, a single quote: "Respect is not owed to age. It's owed to sacrifice." No ribbon cutting. No press. Just quiet. Just like he preferred. But everyone who walked through that building from that day forward, they knew. They looked twice. They remembered. Because Harold didn't demand respect. He delivered it.